What is going on? What's going on?
Oh gosh, he's got to get serious. Don't do that.
Don't get serious? How can we not at a time like this? Debt.
Just let him do his thing, man. He'll get there.
Welcome to the Premium Mindset.
There's almost $9 million in debt.
The weekly podcast where homegrown entrepreneurs and business owners, Evan Ritchie and Cameron Bodden, share the good, the bad, and the ugly of modern entrepreneurship.
Cameron Bodden personally guaranteeing $4 million.
And reveal what really happens behind the scenes of their personal and professional lives.
My life was over.
Stay tuned for real stories, struggles, insight,
If you want to grow, you have to.
and advice from real entrepreneurs in real time.
To tee this topic off first, I wanted to talk to the king of debt.
I think that is a compliment, man.
It is a compliment. You know how to leverage it very well. So I know that you have a lot of experiences with it, from credit cards to investors to different government subsidies, all the different areas in which entrepreneurs have access to debt. What stories initially come to mind for your experiences with it?
Yeah, I mean, I'll never forget one of my good buddies. Like, he almost boasted about how much debt he had, and a lot of people could take that as good debt or bad debt. But when you think about companies as a whole, Google, Facebook, Apple, they all have debt. It's how you leverage yourself as a company.
Right.
Now, there's different stages of good debt and bad debt, and I want to get into that.
Right.
But if you want to scale a company, I don't encourage you to have debt. And this is where I want to get into that. There's fine lines and minute points with every single aspect of it. If we would have got a ton of debt with Green Mango the first year, I don't think that would have been strategic. Now with Coconut, 8 years into Green Mango, feeling like we had a little idea about service companies, we raised a large amount of debt that first year. And that's what I would consider as good debt. Bad debt is basically, the easiest way to explain it is, good debt is if you're getting cash flow from that asset, or if it's taking money. So if you have a car, most of the time, like our vehicles, that's bad debt. What they consider is bad debt because it's not making us any money. But a guy that's an Uber driver, that's providing cash flow for him, that's good debt. So when you're looking at business or personal expenses, it's simple. Is good debt creating cash flow? Then it's good debt. If it's bad debt, it's taking away cash flow.
Yeah. One of the best examples that was taught to me, I think through some studying, I forget where it was, but essentially they said if the pursuit and the goal of what you're going to get from the debt supersedes the amount and the interest rate, it's good. But if you're racking up a bunch of debt because it's a bunch of hopeful business that comes, it's not very good. It's a gamble. The day that I hear you most often talk about your experience with debt is a couple years ago. And the number that comes to mind is, I believe, 4 million.
Well, I was just doing the math. Like, that was 4 million in like hard borrowed money from an investor.
Yeah.
But then when I think about the other debt that I had just in Green Mango, just quick math. Okay, if our average truck was 45 grand, we have over 100 trucks, $4.5 million. So it was almost $9 million in debt just in Green Mango at that snapshot in 2019. I was very frustrated when our investor backed out because my life was over, right? And it was almost too much for me to bear. When I stepped back and analyzed the whole entire situation, and I said no other person would have given me $4 million to grow these companies at the interest rate that we agreed to, it's the greatest blessing for me. And although it was uncomfortable for me as an investor at that time, it was the most strategic thing that I could do with that money. And that's where a lot of people that are listening, I want to encourage you to make sure, and that's why I say the first year, even though, and we see this time and time after again, we'll have someone working for us and they'll handle 60, they could say 70% of the business. It'd be like Cole. Cole's like your right-hand man at Coconut, right? He can run. He doesn't run it every day, but he can run the sales meeting. He can run the CSR meeting. He could run the billing meeting. Every department he could step into and run it. If he goes and starts a carpet cleaning business today, he's going to get slapped in the face by something. Right. Even though he could go talk to an investor and say, I ran Coconut. I could go into every single department And even though he's done that, there's something that will slap him in the face,
Right.
because until you've run everything, you just don't know. And
Right.
that's why the first year I would encourage you that if you do take on debt, be very strategic and make it so that it's at a lower amount at your comfort level. And everyone's is different. And some people that are listening to this podcast, when they hear 4 million in debt, they'll probably laugh and say, "Oh, that's nothing. I got $12 million in
Yeah.
debt." But for me, 4 million was very uncomfortable. And that's a whole nother aspect and element to taking on debt that I want people to consider. Even though an investor or banks will give you the money, that doesn't mean that you should take the full amount. You need to know where your comfort level is, because as an entrepreneur, that's one of the X factors, that if you're stressed out because of the debt, you can't operate and make sound decisions. You're a lot more snappy. You're just a grump to be around. And I've been there. And that's how I know
Yeah.
that. And so understanding debt, understanding where you're at, it's not necessarily a bad thing, but it can be a bad thing if it's out of your comfort zone. And you don't know till you're there.
There was a time in 2019, was it 2019, where also the conversation began for the investment?
That's when he backed out.
When was the year that the investment was made?
Like
2018?
2016, 2017.
Okay. What was the initial reasoning at the time? Just like, because again, if entrepreneurs are listening to this, you and Dusty were at a phase looking at these multiple businesses, and a lot of service businesses aren't always cash heavy, because a lot of what they do is a lot of the work up front, and it's an investment to retain a customer where you start making money as year 2 and 3, and a lot of people don't know that. So what was the initial reasoning where you were seeking investment, and what did you learn from that? How would you go about it differently if you can go back now?
Just to be able to scale. So when you're a one-man operation, in order to hire that customer service rep or hire that salesman, for us, it was, we wanted to run a summer sales program. So Dusty and I started in, I think it was November 2010. We were knocking doors until June, or probably April. Well, we knocked doors for 6 years straight, but it was like April, we're like, okay, if we want to really take off, because we can only close 3 or 4 sales each every single day, that's not going to get us to be the biggest pest control company. So we got to take on debt in order to pay commissions for the salesman.
What was the reason for the amount? How much work was put into the initial ask for the investment? And did you know where you wanted to put all the money up front? Or was it more of, we're going to learn as we go?
Yeah, so because we wanted to leverage our skill sets and the base that we had, we knew that we had to have an investor come in. And at the time, a large portion of that was marketing, because setting up the brand, setting up the systems and operations, and buying 1 or 2 trucks and maybe incubating them in the office at Green Mango, or buying a smaller office, that's really pennies on the dollar.
Right.
A lot of your money in scaling is going to go towards marketing. So our goal was $40,000 per month per company that we had, which at the time was 6, well, excluding Green Mango, is 5 other service companies. And our goal was market dominance. We wanted to become the largest provider in carpet cleaning and windshield replacements and solar and everything that we do in pools. And we were about 2 years, a year and a half down this road of knowing that, hey, it's going to take 3 to 5 years to turn a profit, to keep putting the money back into the market. So each month, that's where, it'd be burning 40 grand plus operating costs. And that's how it got up to $4 million so quickly.
Okay. And if there are people out there who are seeking investments, I know that there's a lot of variations for how people can go about this process, but do you have like a quick elevator pitch for, do you recommend giving equity for investment? Do you recommend a payment plan for a loan? Like, what's your advice for any entrepreneur who is seeking an investment on how they can approach the system to set them up for success?
I think it depends on where you're at in your life and your track record. So when Dusty and I were first starting out, never done anything before, I had to give away in what I would consider is the farm to my dad. And that meant no buyback at a certain point, and just 20% equity of the company for 250 grand.
So when he buys that portion of equity, he doesn't get it back. That's what he's buying because you had established yourselves at that point.
Well, it takes one step further. We do have to pay back the initial investor,
Okay.
Which once again, there's always a deal made. My dad always taught me there's always a deal made. So whether you negotiate no buyback or a buyback or a payback to the investor, that happens. But for us, it was like, that's what I mean. Like, we sacrificed everything, 20% equity, pay back the investment, And then there's no option where I can buy back his equity at a later point, which I wish I would have negotiated, but I didn't. And I just look back as he helped me give me my start. So that's like one first stage. If you're just starting a company, you're probably gonna have to give away the farm.
Right.
The next stage is buying equity. If you can convince an investor that, hey, I've started this company, it's valued at $1 million and I want you to buy 10% of it, give me $100,000. That's what you're selling it for, and no payback, and you're on your way. Like that's one way of raising it. Or just getting what I consider like maybe a hard money loan, which are they're a lot harder to get, but you're paying more interest. So there's more, in a service company, it's extremely difficult because of what you mentioned. It's hard for us to cash flow the first year unless you're on point with upsells. But if you take on that interest, the payments start right away.
Right.
But I've negotiated deals where we don't, our North Carolina deal, $1 million loan, full payback, but an option period at the end of 2 years. So we had interest free for 2 years. Then after 2 years, the investor was able to choose, do I want equity or do I want interest on my money? And then if he chose for interest, then it was a year payout. So that got us 2 free years of interest-free money, which helps with cash flow, right? And then he got to choose one way or the other. The next option would be just saying, hey, no payback, just buy it right now. And that's what we did with the investor I'm talking about, where we were $4 million in debt. We just said, hey, we had an agreement that basically anything over $250,000 we would split equally, and we would be basically, equal partners. But it was an open line of credit to whatever that, in some of those numbers got up to $750,000, $900,000 per company.
So obviously going into that deal, the 2018 deal, the value and long-term plan for growth and scaling superseded the amount invested, right? That's why I want to set the backdrop for portraying what truly the $4 million meant. And people might think like, oh, well, like Green Mango has to pay it back. But tell me about the feeling of signing Cameron Bodden, personally guaranteeing that amount of money. Like what emotions are you going through? What's your home dynamic looking like as you try to explain to Alyssa what's happening? Like walk me through those emotions so people can fully understand what it is that entrepreneurs do go through when they choose a uphill fight with an investment that big.
Yeah, so for me, it's just the feeling is lonely because no one else really understands what that's like. And that's where I'm coaching those people that are out there that are going to go raise money, is there's going to be something that goes wrong in your company. And when it goes wrong, how are you going to react as the entrepreneur? Are you going to fold up and quit and file bankruptcy? Are you going to rise to the occasion and figure it out? But you have all these pressure points coming down, especially because all the investors that I've taken on are people that I truly care about. The last thing I want to do is walk away from their money and just call them and say, hey, I'm sorry, I failed. I can't pay you back anything. And although my dad never put any pressure on me that way, I probably felt the most pressure from him. And that's the pressure that I put on myself. And that's why you got to know your limits of what you can take on.
And having a plan where the money's going to be spent. And
so what I like, the formula that I use, so let's say, I have this company, like my job, it pays me, let's say $20,000 a month.
Yeah.
And my expenses are $5,000. So in my mind, and how I look at it, is I have about $15,000 a month to kind of play at the casino of life. And so if I have a note due, so let's say a company goes $1 million and I owe $10,000 a month. In my mind, I'm still cash flow positive $5,000. That's what I did with all those companies, and the math that I was doing in my head is, okay, worst case scenario, if all these companies go down, I owe $4 million. I was splitting it with Dusty, personally liable for $2 million. And these are just rough numbers. They're not exact, but let's say $2 million and we had a 2-year payment, a couple $100,000 a month. Can I afford that with what I make each month? And that's always like my meter for how I'm doing. And I think a lot of people should do that with investment properties or anything that they want to cash flow, is look at how much you make that's consistent, that can't be variable. Like the past 2 years, I've made this much money a month. My bills are this much money. And you either put that money into savings or to an investment, and you decide, but you might as well play with that money if you want to be aggressive. But some people just keep it in their savings account, and that's okay. But if you're an entrepreneur that's wanting to scale, you need to take that extra $10,000 or $15,000, whatever that delta is, and go double down on something to try and make it work.
Yeah.
Do it within your comfort zone so that you're not just like a stressed out CEO.
I think that's huge because that, if I can speak a little bit to my experience at that time, everything was heightened at the time as far as our meetings. I could see the weight of having to personally guarantee that. And I took a lot of pride in one, I didn't want to fold. I didn't want to sell. I wanted to not only pay back, but in my head, like I wanted that investor to regret pulling out. And so nothing would make me happier to know that not only do they get paid back, but they end up being a customer and they're like, dang it, like I missed out.
Right.
But you hit on like know what your capabilities are. And I want to talk real quick on when you take on a debt amount like that and you have a plan, how important is it for you now versus 2019 to have the right team to carry that weight with you in those goals versus 2019? Because I feel like at the time it was like I didn't know a lot. You shouldered a lot of the stress and allowed me to just do my thing. But now I feel like we've had transparency where people understand, hey, if we're short payroll here and there, like there's no, I feel like we walk a healthy line, but you're very good about sharing like, hey guys, like this is what we're going through. I need everyone to step it up. And now you have in my opinion, a higher caliber team to take on that stress with you. When there are entrepreneurs out there who take on certain loans, at what point do you recommend over marketing, staffing appropriately to carry the stress of scaling?
But that takes on a whole nother level of just uncomfortableness. Is that the larger that debt number is, the more people you should have to help carry that load. Right. But then you're counting on that person to go operate on that level of what you're hoping them to do.
Yeah.
You need a team and you need to rely on that team, because that's why a lot of people have partners in business, is because they want to, when the ship's going down or there's problems, there's nothing more healthy than being able to call a guy and that understands exactly what you're going through, and you guys can bounce ideas off of and talk to. And that's why I'm a huge advocate of having a mentor. If you don't have a business partner, or even if you do have a business partner, someone that is helping you, that is detached from the situation, that can help you understand what's going on from a higher light.
People might have a lot of questions, so always feel free to reach out to us. Debt comes in a lot of different forms, from investors to banks to having a company credit card, whatever it might be. Is again, back to the analogy I shared at the beginning, is the very easiest form of debt is one, knowing your business, your analytics, your numbers. But if you can put the cost of marketing on your credit card on day one of a month, and you can net higher than the amount that you paid before that credit card payment is due, there is no better form of debt. So when it comes to investor debt, or when it comes to lines of credit, whatever it might be, always ask yourself, back to your point, when the payments come due for this, plus the interest rate, is what I netted from this loan, do I perceive it to supersede it? And is it going to be higher? And those are easy, very simple ways for you to at least start the conversations with debt.
Or if it's going to cash flow for you. And that's why a service vehicle could be the best debt. The last thing you'd want to do on a startup company, or even us today that's wanting to continue to be in growth mode, is go pay off a vehicle.
Right.
But if I have 15 vehicles sitting out there and they're not making me money, it's the worst that I could have ever.
Right. I remember there was even a time, so try to think of this too as a business owner, and maybe our situation's different at Coconut because our vans are so expensive, but I remember I was driving a van as my personal vehicle. I forgot who it was, whether it was Dave Canlin, you, Dusty, but they were like, it actually is better for the business to just get me a little car or truck, because that van is $100,000. And so what you choose to take on as a business owner, it's not always black and white where, hey, I'm going to save money and drive my company vehicle everywhere. Where if you drive something that has a lot of equipment in it, and you're putting a lot of wear and tear in it, and you're not getting the true value of that vehicle for the duration and the lifespan of it.
Or it's making you that money that it should during that duration.
So there's a lot of ways to approach it. And I think that we could probably cover this conversation a few more times as far as negotiations and making sure that every situation you go into is a win-win, but what would be your final takes on any new entrepreneur exploring the field of debt and I guess that topic in general?
Yeah, if you want to grow, you have to take on debt, but I would caution you to make sure that you've kind of experienced scale at some degree before you take that on, because money only is a band-aid for you to ignore the problems that are going on in the business. And when your bank account's at zero, that's when you look at problems with each department. And if you get an investor, it's just kicking the can down the road. And that's why I say the first year as a business owner, you probably shouldn't take on debt, because it's just going to be a band-aid. In that first year, if you figure out and try and go through all your systems and processes, great. And we talked about KPIs. If you're going to take on debt, you better have key performance indicators with your department, because you're going to have to watch those things, because it's going to be a lot harder for you to see those mistakes, because money's there for payroll. But when money's not there for payroll, you're going to go looking. With investment money, it's there and you just ignore it.
So track it. Make sure you have a good CFO. Make sure you're investing in the right software. So bottom line is you're in the entrepreneurial field, whether you're a solopreneur or you're looking into growing. Not all debt is bad, and there is a lot of debt that you can use to leverage your growth and scaling your business.
Nice.